Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas blasted a Liberal MP in the House of Commons recently as she defended Alberta's energy sector. Alberta's hoping to expand on its $100 billion a year worth of trade with the United States. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf will explain. And a program known as the Shop of Wonders is hoping to help more than 1,400 people in our community during the Christmas season.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Government ministers in BC say the province is through the worst of the weather that brought historic flooding and damage to the south coast. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth says now the tough task of cleanup and rebuilding can begin.
The worst weather now appears to be behind us, and I think we are all grateful for that. I'm happy to report that Environment Canada is forecasting more typical seasonal conditions for the next week. We'll see some precipitation, but nothing as concerning as in recent weeks. Now that this latest storm is behind us, we must look towards recovery, which will take time. British Columbians have been through a lot, and governments at all levels will continue to be here through this difficult time. Our Committee of Cabinet Ministers met again today to discuss the immediate and ongoing support needs of communities affected by the extreme weather events. And I'm pleased that we've convened a joint provincial and federal working group to address this emergency. While there is much work ahead of us, I'm glad that we have the federal government at the table.
The work by farmers and volunteers and companies to clean out barns and to remove those animals continues to be extremely heartbreaking. And I request that folks remain empathetic and caring in their comments as they continue to do this very difficult work.
Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's representing Alberta at the 2021 Council of State Governments National Conference. The purpose of the trip is to work with legislators and provide Alberta's perspective on key policy issues, including the importance of trade and investment. Newdorf says Alberta will be setting up trade offices in Chicago, Denver, and Seattle, Washington. MLA Nathan Newdorf joins us now from New Mexico. So you say opening these offices will create even further opportunities to create more business with the United States?
There's over $200 billion of trade between Canada and the U.S. on an average year kind of basis. So that's a lot of trade back and forth. And Alberta exports more than 100 billion of that portion. So Alberta itself is a huge, huge part of our annual trade with the United States. So we're really excited about this announcement.
So why did the province decide on the offices in Chicago, Denver, and Seattle?
Nearly $50 billion of Alberta's trade each year goes to Illinois, Colorado, and Washington State. So we've chosen those cities with purpose to continue to expand those already existing trade routes and hopefully grow them from 50 billion to whatever we can achieve.
So which industries have you been pitching to legislators in the United States? Agriculture, our energy sector?
Obviously, energy is a huge topic down here. They have a growing population with more and more energy demands. The current President Biden, is seeking an increase in oil production from other trade partners, and we're trying to get him to look at Alberta. But that doesn't stop there. We've got manufacturing, petrochemicals and plastics. We've got agricultural trade and food products. So quite a range, as well as forestry. Lumber products we're a big supplier to the United States in those kind of trade products as well.
That was Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf joining us from the 2021 Council of State Governments National Conference in New Mexico, which will wrap up on Sunday. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas took a few shots at Liberal MP Mark Gerritsen in the House of Commons recently. Gerritsen wants Alberta to walk away from the oil and gas sector, while MP Thomas didn't want any part of that and stood up for our energy sector. Have a look.
The Conservatives are just stuck in this era of extracting oil. It's all that they care about. It's what they talk about over and over and over and over. If this is the case, why is it so hard for this member and the Conservative Party to recognize that there is a future beyond oil and that we should be chasing and pursuing and going after that?
Good question.
Honourable member for Lethbridge.
I would ask the honourable member how he brushed his teeth this morning. At least I hope he did. I would ask the honourable member what his suit is made out of and whether or not that used petroleum at all. I would ask him if his tie has any petroleum, his pin, his shirt, his shoes, his computer, perhaps his hair product. I would ask the honourable member to tell me, should we just ex-nay the oil and gas? You want to sit naked in a forest somewhere? Because the vast majority of Canadians surely don't want to.
Wow. The bill to add conversion therapy to the criminal code, Bill C-4, was passed unanimously at the House of Commons and is now at the Senate. If it passes there, then it gets sent back to the House to receive royal assent and become law. Now, this bill passed unanimously even by the Conservatives, which some people found surprising. You can include former Tory MP Derek Sloan in that group, who joins us now from Belleville, Ontario. Derek, were you surprised that it was unanimous with the Conservatives as well?
So what actually happened here was a unanimous consent motion. So motions happen all the time. They're not the same as like a recorded vote on something. But this motion actually skipped the debate entirely on second reading and third reading. It skipped committee, all of this, and just shot the bill right to the Senate. So that's, fairly unusual to do. But this was sold to the Conservatives MPs as they said, listen, the Liberals, there's no way they're going to agree to this. They're going to want to fight this out. So this is just a tactic. And secondly, they didn't realize that it was going to happen literally, the minute after their caucus meeting. So 20 minutes later, this happened. And it appears maybe that the Conservatives actually had a deal with the Liberals, because the Liberals accepted it, and then they had this big hugging, cheering, congratulatory scene on the floor of the House of Commons.
Now, on another note, what are your thoughts of former Tory and current Senator Denise Batters, who now has over 6,300 signatures from party members who want to see a leadership review of party leader Aaron O'Toole?
I think that Aaron O'Toole is not the right leader for the Conservative Party. He's running it in a very authoritarian fashion. People are telling me, they're feeling intimidated and so on the inside. I think she did a brave thing, and there's a lot of people out there that agree with her. So whether it will gain traction right now is tough to say, but I think she did the right thing.
That was former Conservative MP Derek Sloan joining us from Belleville, Ontario. And by the way, Derek Sloan is also trying to launch a new national party called the True North Party of Canada, and he's also coming out with a new book next week called Glorious and Free. Well, the warm weather we had been experiencing is gone in southwestern Alberta, and some of the white stuff is on the way. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it appears as though a cool and snowy weekend is shaping up.
It sure is, Hal. In fact, it might even be a good weekend to break out the skis and snowboards and head for the mountains, because we are about to get dumped on. After midnight this evening, that's when the snow starts. We should be getting around 5 to 10 centimeters on a Saturday. Also winds, 20 to 40K winds this evening, continuing into Saturday as well. High tomorrow at -1. I'll have a lot more weather details for you coming up later on in the show, though.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Community Foundation of Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta announced a local donor has a large sum of money for Woods Homes. The $21,000 gift is a donor-advised grant that will help tackle youth homelessness here in our city.
And so with this donation, part of this donation actually will be able to remain open during the colder winter months and provide immediate support and counseling and just services to the young people instead of sending them out on the streets and having them become more at risk. The other portion of this money is going to help us to be able to provide young people with some of those unforeseen needs, right? Like things that they wouldn't be able to get on their own, such as things to support employment, school fees, transportation, medical expenses, you name it, that will help with that.
Whether you support the NDP, you support the UCP, or the Liberal Party, it doesn't really matter what government group you support. It's important to tell the government that it's not acceptable that these youth are on the street and they're not getting the supports that they need. Mental health it's a crisis, and we're at an all-time high for cases of mental health in all age groups. But these youth are our future leaders. And if we cannot support them now and do not choose to support them now, I'm afraid to see what happens even 10 years from now.
The Community Foundation has been dishing out grants for over 55 years here in our city. The City of Lethbridge's Recreation and Culture Fee Assistance Program was approved to help out low-income individuals here in our city. Now, early in the pandemic, the program wasn't seeing the uptake it was hoping for. City Council recently approved changes to make it more pandemic-friendly. You can apply for $200 towards a local activity of your own choosing.
The unfortunate part is it demonstrates that there's people that are low income in our community and need the supports. And obviously the end goal would be that we wouldn't even have to have this program. So it is a double-edged sword, but we do encourage people to access the program. And being the end of the year right now is actually kind of a nice time. If you haven't utilized it since July 1st, you can still put in and ask for funding and apply before December 31st.
Once January 1st rolls around, the $200 amount will return to the pre-pandemic number of $150 per person during the 2 funding cycles. Well, it is time for another edition of the Shop of Wonders. The program allows for those who are in need in our city to pick out gifts in a large shop during the Christmas season. The program is hoping to serve 1,400 people this year, including 900 children. As Micah Quinn explains now, there's still a need for toy donations.
The Shop of Wonders is now located at the Lethbridge Regional Park and Ride Terminal Station. The shop is in a 4,000 square foot room, and right when you come in, you'll notice the beautiful lights and wonderful toys that will be given to families in need.
So we've kind of always made this an experience for the whole family. So when they come through the door, they are greeted by our kind of elf volunteer squad, and they come in and it's decorated like a big giant toy shop. They get to come through and pick out stocking stuffers, and they get 2 small gifts per child and 1 Santa gift.
632 kids are already registered for the Shop of Wonders. Every year, the shop sees a shortage of donations, and toys are needed in the teen and baby and infant categories.
People, I think, have a difficult time knowing what to shop for a teenager. I have one at home, and they can be quite tricky and picky sometimes with what they want. So I totally understand that, but we definitely are seeing a need for teen and infant items again this year.
The program is only 6 years old and is already expanded to towns like Claresholm, Tabor, and Okotoks. Plans are also in motion to expand to Calgary as well. Angelica McNee is a volunteer for the program, and she works as a personal shopper to help out families who come in.
Probably one of my favorite roles is that I get to sit with the families and I get to visit with mom and dad and just kind of hear about their story, or just coming to understand what life is like for them.
The Shop of Wonders will be open until Christmas Eve. If you know of a family in need, or if you're interested in the program yourself, you can visit myvictory.ca to register. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Baby Yoda, nice touch. The Village of Sterling is hosting a very special event this weekend called Light Up Sterling. It's a community-minded way to celebrate the upcoming Christmas season. The fire department will parade around the village, and the tourism kiosk in the village will showcase some Christmas caroling along with sleigh and wagon rides. Food and hot chocolate will also be served. Santa will make an appearance as well before the lights are shown. And a unique addition to the event is a life-sized Christmas elf.
There's an awesome little community events committee in Sterling, and it's a new committee, and they came up with this fantastic idea to have this little Buddy the Scout who goes around the village and keeps an eye on our village. So every night, Buddy will go back to the North Pole, and then in the morning he goes into a new place. So it's very exciting. We're gonna have so much fun with people taking pictures of him and posting it on social media and finding him every day. I think it's gonna bring people out to the community.
Light Up Sterling starts Saturday afternoon 4:30 at the Sterling Information Display Kiosk. You know, Christmas is usually a time of year when people are joyous as Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus. It can also be a tough time for those who are alone and feeling isolated. Rod Dorn is the owner of Birch Bay Counseling Services in Medicine Hat. He says there's no shame in getting help if you're feeling depressed, since proper mental health is so important.
And there's no shame in addressing, when you have a mental health problem, because it's really a physical health problem just as much as a mental health problem. And there's no shame in going to try to seek help for anything, whether it be, quitting smoking or going to the gym or changing your eating habits. I mean, we all have these sort of common things where we're all just a work in progress.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Rod Dorn of Birch Bay Counseling Services coming up in the second half of our show. The opposition party in Saskatchewan is urging the province to expand eligibility for COVID-19 booster shots for all adults 6 months after their second dose. NDP leader Ryan Miley says expanding the program is necessary to prevent a fifth wave and to protect those from the emergence of the Omicron variant. Booster shots are currently available to healthcare workers, people over the age of 65, First Nations groups, or those in the far north, 50 years of age and older. The Manitoba government says it is planning on spending $31.6 million to expand the Selkirk Regional Health Centre. The goal is to add 30 more acute care beds and to provide more surgeries. Health officials say the expansion will mean more patients will be able to be treated closer to home without having to go to Winnipeg.
The new beds will support more inpatients from across the region locally. These new beds will help enhance this facility's capacity to treat and monitor sicker patients. Surgeries performed at the site, which include general procedures, gynecology, urology, plastics, and endoscopy, will be increased as part of this significant expansion.
Construction is expected to begin next year. A late-season wildfire pushed by strong winds has ripped through a tiny central Montana farming town. The blaze burned around 24 homes and destroyed 4 grain elevators that had stood for more than a century. Around 300 residents were evacuated, but fortunately, there were no injuries. For the first time in 26 years, Major League Baseball is seeing a work stoppage. The sport's collective bargaining agreement expired, and owners immediately locked out players in a move that threatened spring training and opening day.
There is significant gaps between the sides about when the players are granted arbitration and free agency rights. The players believe that not enough teams are competing on the field, that there are too many teams tanking, which is driving down the average player salary. So that's among, several disputes between the players and owners. For each side, there's a lot at stake. The players, I think, feel like they did not do very well in the last collective bargaining agreement in 2016. So there are jobs at stake, certainly on the union side, to do better than they did before. The owners, they haven't made as much money as they are used to making in the past couple seasons because of the coronavirus and attendance restrictions. So, they seem less likely to give back or be more flexible, given their, I wouldn't call it losses, but not making as much money as they had been previously.
Well, it did feel like baseball weather earlier this week in southwestern Alberta, but not now. A cold front has arrived, and with it, some flurries. Full weather details are coming up. We went from above seasonal values earlier this week to well below for Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, not only will it feel much cooler, but we should also expect some snow?
Yeah, you're right, Hal. Mother Nature has been a little bit all over the place lately because cooler weather is upon us, and the snow, she is coming. Beginning this evening after midnight, that's when the snow starts. We should get 5 to 10 centimeters tomorrow, high of -1. Wind gusts up to 40 tomorrow as well. -12 is our high on a Sunday. Now that's even lower than the average low for this time of year, so that's kind of chilly. Into Monday, climbing to -8, -3 on Tuesday, up to 3 degrees on Wednesday, and then back down to -4 on Thursday. So it is a little bit of a yo-yo roller coaster there, but we're certainly starting to see temperatures falling well below that average high, which is 1 degree, and sometimes even lower than the average low, which is -10 for this time of year. 14 was where we were at, though, back in 1988 and in 1972. We were at -31, nowhere near either of those temperatures today. 8:10 is when the sun rose this morning, and her sun set this afternoon. 4:33 p.m. Seems like it's getting earlier and earlier. In fact, I think it's 3 minutes shorter than it was yesterday. So Victoria, looking at some showers ending in the afternoon. There's some snow happening in the higher terrains, up to 2 centimeters. Vancouver also expecting 2 centimeters of snow mixed with rain. Minus 10 the high in Edmonton tomorrow, and Calgary looking at minus 3 with 2 to 4 centimeters of the white stuff falling there. Now over in Saskatoon, we're seeing a high of minus 6, minus 4 in Regina, looking at some flurries happening there. Minus 6 in Winnipeg tomorrow with mainly sunny skies, only 15 km/h winds in all of those prairie cities, not too bad. Toronto, we are seeing some flurries happening there as well. 7 degrees the high. Minus 8 in Ottawa. Ottawa looking at 2 to 4 centimeters falling there as well. And 2 centimeters of the white stuff tomorrow in Montreal with a high of minus 6 as we look further east into Atlantic Canada. Let's get it Fredericton. Sunshine, minus 6 the high there, minus 1 the high in Halifax. Now Charlottetown also looking at some flurries, minus 4. Flurries mixed with rain tomorrow in St. John's-Newfoundland. Also some gusty winds up to 80 km/h along the coast there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Canada's labour market gained 154,000 jobs last month. That dropped the national unemployment rate to 6%. That is down from 6.7% in October and just shy of the 5.7% recorded in February of 2020, the last full month before the pandemic struck. Stats Canada says the number of long-term unemployed fell by 62,000. That is the first monthly drop since August, with the decline most acute among those out of work for a year or more. The agency warns, however, that signs are pointing to worsening labor shortages or skill mismatches. BMO Financial Group beat expectations as it reported its fourth quarter profit was up by more than 37% from a year ago to nearly $2.2 billion. The Montreal-based bank beat expectations of $3.21 a share by coming in at $3.33 a share. The bank also announced that it is raising its quarterly dividend by 25% and plans to buy back up to 22.5 million of its shares. All 6 of Canada's big banks have raised their dividends and announced plans to buy back large numbers of shares as they reported their fourth quarter results this week. There's a report out which says that world religions, and not just Christianity, contribute more than $67 billion to the world economy. Brian Grimm is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. He says there's a lot of economic value to religion.
The religious economy of Canada would make it a larger economy than 110 countries in the world. So it would be like the 72nd largest economy in the world if you think of national GDP. So that's no small number.
Catch the full interview with Brian Grimm from the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and Jeanette Rocher coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 128 points to 20,633. The Dow was down 59 points to 34,580. The S&P 500 was down 38 points to 4538, and the Nasdaq was down 295 points on the day to 15,085. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 10 cents to 66.40 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to 4.09 US. Gold was up 14.54 to 17.8329 US an ounce, and silver was up 14 cents on the day to 22.52 US an ounce. Wheat is at $12.51 per bushel, barley's at $9.73, canola's at $23.22, and corn is at $10.80 per bushel. Live cattle were up 3 cents to $137.68. Feeder cattle were down $1.65 to $164.13, and lean hogs were down 40 cents to $74. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.86 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta is setting up trade offices in Chicago, Denver, and Seattle, Washington. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf, who's at the Council of State Governments National Conference in New Mexico, says these new locations will help Alberta to expand trade with the United States. Neudorf says Canada does over $200 billion of trade with the U.S., and Alberta alone exports more than $100 billion annually worth of oil, gas, agriculture, and lumber. Christmas is usually a joyous time of year, but sometimes it can be very depressing for a number of Canadians. Coming up, we hear from a counselor who discusses how he helps those battling depression and anxiety during the very busy holiday season.
Many of us look forward to the holiday season with family dinners, shopping and gift opening, church services, etc., etc. The list goes on and on because the holidays are so busy, let's face it. But for others, it can be one of the loneliest and most depressing times of the year. Well, we want to discuss how to respond to this with today's guest, Rod Dorn. He has a Master of Social Work degree and is the owner of Birch Bay Counseling Services in Medicine Hat, and we welcome him to the show today. Rod, thanks so much for being with us today. So great to have you on.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And, when I was asked to do this, it was quite an honor, but also kind of scary because Christmas is such a big part of the year for so many Canadians. And I kind of wanted to reduce it down to a manageable size. So when I think of the perceptions and understandings of Christmas, I think there's some themes. And some of these themes are, one is privilege, what we have, sharing together, connection, support, what builds us up. So some of us have that, but there's these other themes. Pain is another theme because it's kind of like that reminder of what we've lost or what we don't have, what we see others having, and we may have isolation, loneliness, disconnection.
Yeah, absolutely.
To use alliteration, a little bit further, just these P words came up, production. It's this pressure of picture perfect Christmas and keeping up with the status quo. And that can be really anxiety provoking. And there can be a lot of financial pressures and things. And then lastly, pause. We pause at this time of year because it's like, finally the culmination of everything that's happened this year, we stop and it's year end and it's Christmas and we may not be completely prepared for this overwhelming moment of kind of trying to soak in all the changes and things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you're answering my first question, which is why is it so many people get depressed during the holiday season? I mean, you're kind of explaining it there. So there's so many fun activities happening, isn't there? So maybe perhaps some people feel like, seeing others having so much fun, maybe they themselves are feeling left out somehow if they don't have family around or friends, just that loneliness.
Yes, definitely. I do agree with that. I think, these themes that I've mentioned, privilege, pain, production, pause, these can contribute in a really kind of unhealthy way. And that may lead to anxiety, depression. It may trigger common psychological struggles such as grief. And I kind of practice through this trauma-informed lens. And the trauma lens really speaks to what is the importance of understanding meaning, the attachment and the connection that we have within our communities, within our families, within how we interact in our place, I guess, in the world. And so these deep inner triggers that Christmas time that are so, in our face, I think, this can maybe trigger up abandonment, abuse. I'm not good enough. I don't belong. Something's wrong with me. I don't fit. And yeah, I think that can really be hard for so many people.
It's true. How much do you think social media might play into this? Like we often see, others sharing pictures of gifts, friends and family gatherings, and maybe we tend to compare and maybe we just feel that we don't measure up and maybe feeling some self-pity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, social media, pop culture, this really does reinforce this belief that Christmas is a time of happiness, abundance, laughter, joy. We see all these Hallmark movies and they're in these, everything just is so perfect. But it portrays, it sort of forces us to think, or believe this is what is normal. And what is normal is to have this privilege. So it almost separates the ones of us who are the haves and yet neglects and sometimes even in a hidden way may ostracize the have-nots. Sometimes we don't recognize our privilege, and that's maybe because we didn't experience the loss or the isolation that so many have. this critical theory of oppression really is what it is, and it's highlighted by Bob Mullally. He's a researcher, but this, pulls upon this sort of disadvantages underpinning and shoring up the silent forms of oppression portrayed by the privileged and felt by the less fortunate by accident usually. So I think if we recognize all that we have and are grateful for, though, we're able to move towards sort of understanding more of the compassion that's needed, and sharing and just providing support that's needed for others who are unfortunately really struggling at this time of year.
That's maybe a good way that a person should respond if they find themselves in that comparison trap and maybe feeling sorry for themselves. And, we also perhaps have unrealistic expectations sometimes during the holiday season, like you mentioned the Hallmark movies there. Maybe we need to be okay with just an average Christmas or New Year's Day. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really convoluted and tricky time of year. I think Christmas is actually more psychological than we really give it credit for. We are in our heads a lot, I think. But I think, many are misguided. What is the true meaning? And I think we need to pause and actually pace things out a little bit and ask, what is Christmas? And I mean, I don't mean to open up Pandora's box here, but however, if you look from a Christian paradigm, Christmas does have this meaning and a reality that nobody can have more or less than another. Actually, it's to say the gift of Christ the Savior. We are all living in God's grace, and we have this gift of eternal fellowship. So I think that's a message of hope, and it really brings everything back down to equality and equity. And I think, for those of us who ascribe to that, we can be thankful and content about that, even with, in the face of financial pressures and a lot of the cost of living squeeze that we're living with. But I mean, even if somebody isn't following that perspective, I think there are some major themes that we can still reconcile with more of a contemporary Christmas view. A time of compassion and connection with the world where we live. We've all been on that receiving end of compassion, probably. And, we consider maybe sharing that around as much as possible so that we can bless those who are poor in spirit and they can be reminded of love and connection, and, they can partake, I guess. I think this is sort of like a really sort of pulling on the idea of a therapeutic community, but I think these are things we can all do. And so, connection and belonging is really a healing attachment. And that's a lot of what we do, even in a therapeutic session for somebody individually.
Wow. Now, you being a counselor yourself, how serious is this holiday depression? Is it usually a temporary thing, or can it turn into something that's more permanent if it isn't handled properly?
Yeah, in my best understanding of mental health problems and these issues, I mean, it's very complicated. There's depression and anxiety and stress disorders and psychosis disorders and substance use disorders, and there's just so many different ways of I guess challenges that we have to sort of come to understand and treat. So I mean, these things may be circumstantial. They may be biological in their formation sometimes, and they may be a little bit of both. So I think that it's this perspective that psychiatry and psychology have to come together, and we're looking at possibly a pattern of depressive, anxious, or stressful, angry thoughts triggering a nervous system. And that change may happen actually at a biological level and may account for some genetic variations later down the road. That may not be possible to reverse. So I guess there's circumstantially, these things may pop up, but they may last for more pervasive things. And so I think prevention is a huge piece of mental health that as a community, as a society, as a discipline, we need to do more about prevention. The message that I really want to portray here is to encourage people to really be considerate and intentional about how their attitudes, their thoughts, their behaviors, how all of these things impact their mental well-being, which is their physical well-being. It is interconnected, and we shouldn't think of mental health as somewhere out there. The body and the mind are connected. We don't want to deplete it. We don't want to harm it. We want this connection to be holistic and nourished. And so that's how I practice. And a lot of us practice from this sort of biopsychosocial spiritual lens. It appears to me that science and natural revelation do kind of come together and show that these are interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rod, what advice do you have for friends or family who maybe see a loved one who is going through this depression? How should we respond?
Well, I think that, if we practice compassion, we can really help that person out. So we have to recognize, people are hurting for whatever reasons. And, if we offer care and support, if we share the abundance that we have with them, this is the season of giving, right? And so I think that's a big piece. And connection, like for somebody to feel like that belonging, the best things in life are not things. These are relationships. I think that, that goes a long ways in helping somebody participate and feel important and refocus their mind on some of the things that they still have versus, some of these temptations to think about the things they've lost. Courage, it can be very challenging, very difficult, and very scary to sort of go through a time of suffering. So just to honor that it's very courageous for somebody to approach their mental health problems, to move towards that pain and work through that pain wherever it's coming from inside.
Yeah.
And then another one is creativity, trying new things, new perspectives. You can find a new way, change the way you see things, and the way that you see things will change.
Oh, interesting. I like that. I know, and of course, another C word is COVID. COVID has added so many challenges to what's going on. I know here in Southern Alberta, we still have restrictions when it comes to family gatherings and visiting elderly relatives in care homes. So this also must have a significant impact on loneliness for many individuals. How should we deal with this?
Yeah, technology is that thing that, it's the blessing and the curse. It pulls us away from each other, but in some ways it pulls us closer together. And so I want to really pull on the strengths of what technology can do for us. With the advancement of Zoom, here we are, we're a few hundred kilometers away, and yet we're able to have this face-to-face chat, which is wonderful. I think we can use that. We can use that as a source of connection. If we can't physically be somewhere, if it's not allowed, if there's a restriction, we can text, we can video chat, we can write letters even, bring back the old pen pal thing. If that's what sort of our folks in the care centers and things, if that's what they have access to and that's what they're comfortable with, that could be a lot of fun, and that could mean the world for people.
Yeah. Really quick too, how would a person know that things have reached a point when they should go and get some professional help? And also, I think that some people might be scared to seek that counseling. So what would you say to those who might be hesitant to go get help?
Yeah, I think awareness is so key in terms of finding out sort of what is the problem. And oftentimes the way I refer to it as is this is like the check engine light comes on somewhere. We know there's a problem. We may not know exactly what it is, but when the check engine light comes on, it's like symptoms. I don't have as much energy. I'm sleeping, I'm oversleeping, or I can't sleep. Oftentimes our appetite, or we're having headaches and these other somatic symptoms. Maybe we're using substances to cope, and we're getting angry and irritable. People are noticing around us that we're not the same as we were before. These are all sort of like that check engine light to say, hey, maybe it's time to sort of check in and see if there's something that, is really bothering you inside, something that might be, contributing to some of these sort of nervous system uh, concerns that end up sort of getting worse, sort of, if not addressed. And there's no shame in addressing, when you have a mental health problem, because it's really a physical health problem just as much as a mental health problem. And there's no shame in in going to like try to seek help for anything, whether it be, quitting smoking or going to the gym or changing your eating habits. I mean, we all have these sort of common things where we're all just a work in progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said there, Rod. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your insights and your wisdom and your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really thought this was a good time, and we'll see you around.
Rod Dorn is with Birch Bay Counseling Services in Medicine Hat. Well, some Canadians think that religion is helpful for the country, but there are others who would disagree. But how many of us believe that religion is something that's actually important to Canada's economy? Well, today's guest says that that is exactly the case. I'm joined by Dr. Brian Grimm. He holds a doctorate in quantitative sociology and is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between religious freedom and the economy, and is also the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy: How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. That is a mouthful. Dr. Brian Grimm, thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
So can you first of all tell us a bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, so we're a private foundation, public foundation, non-religious foundation that helps businesses see that religious freedom for everyone, including people that don't have a religion, is good for economies and good for business, and then helps businesses promote a more diverse, religiously diverse and inclusive workforce for their own companies. So we both produce studies, but also work with companies directly to help them become more religiously friendly or religiously inclusive, however you might like to phrase it.
Mm-hmm. Now, your study estimates the economic value of religion to Canadian society at about $30 billion annually. And I think the mid-range was estimated at around $67 billion, and the high-end estimate puts it at an astounding $690 billion. So can you explain how you go about finding that out, and what do those numbers even mean?
Yeah, well, the high number is just one that takes into account the sort of spending power of religiously affiliated Canadians. So that's just a reference number. That's what their household income is. The households of families that are religious have that much spending power. So that's not really the one we focus on. The middle range is the one that we do focus on. And just to put that in context, that would the religious economy of Canada would make it a larger economy than 110 countries in the world. So it would be like the 72nd largest economy in the world if you think of national GDP. So that's no small number. The way we go about it is looking first at the receipts and the amount of money coming into congregations of all sorts, Christian, Muslims, Jewish, all the different faith congregations, and then look at how they spend that money. So if you think about that, that's money. People usually think that's money coming in, they spend on themselves, but it's actually fueling economies because you pay salaries, either it's clergy or groundskeepers. You pay, especially in Canada, for snow removal, from parking lots. They pay for lights, heating, electricity. But more than that, then we look at what is the value of what they do for society. So more than faith congregations are more than just organizations that tend to their own flocks, but they provide daycare, they provide services for people with addiction, they provide community gathering places, and all of that has economic value. So we calculate that up. We also look at faith institutions like hospitals, universities, as well as faith-related businesses, and that comes to that total.
It's interesting that you say business, because when you first were explaining it, it sounds almost like a business model. But, then again, you get into how they help people. So there are some who might say that while religious organizations provide help for less fortunate, it doesn't actually translate into real dollars for the economy. But where do you see direct benefits to the economy? You mentioned educational.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, one is the direct spending. It's just money coming in and going out. That money doesn't just come into a collection plate and stay there and bury it under a mattress. It gets spent on community service and various program salaries, like I mentioned. The other is that some of the programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, if there wouldn't be faith congregations, almost half of them in Canada would have no place to meet. And so those have a spiritual aspect to them. Churches and other congregations open their doors to these, and we estimate that saves hundreds of lives every year. And that's if you count the loss of a life, statisticians count that as millions and millions of dollars for every premature death in terms of cost to the system, cost in lost wages, cost to families. So it's in some ways measuring the benefit is measuring the good that they do that prevents harm coming to people, such as addiction.
That's interesting. You also note that much of our healthcare comes from religious organizations. So can you explain this?
Well, so in Canada, of course, much of the education and healthcare systems came often from the Catholic Church. So the foundations of many of even education and healthcare in Canada, most of it has religious roots. Now, these days, most of the hospitals and schools, especially hospitals, have become nationalized. But in the background, you have that. But there are significant numbers of private faith-based hospitals, educational institutions, and schools. And one thing I'd say, even though the schools, many of them are Catholic schools or other Christian schools, they still get some tax dollars supporting them. But that whole foundation of education and what they're providing is there because of their faith connection. So you walk into a faith-based school, and immediately you see that this is something different. Kids are going to, a church service or a mass, and they're getting different kinds of teaching. So for someone to say, well, it's, that's not significant. Actually, it is a tremendous contribution that religion continues to make to Canadian society.
So how would you respond to those who would argue that religion causes more problems than it's worth in Canada, especially when we're looking at some of the sex abuse scandals associated with religious leaders? And now, of course, the residential school atrocities are a huge focus, and then violent extremism. So how do you respond to that?
Well, certainly, religion can be one of the greatest sources of hope and goodness in the world. And it can also be, when misused, one of the greatest sources of hurt and tragedy in the world. So not to whitewash those problems, those are serious problems. One of the ways that we see in a society like Canada is that religious freedom provides a framework for dealing with times when religion falls short of its ideals or commits crimes even. So that religious freedom allows sort of, you could say, a competitive marketplace, again, going back to an economic analogy, that, if one church or one denomination or one faith group is guilty of some atrocity, society itself comes in and challenges that. And rather than criminalizing religion, it goes after criminal activities that may have happened within a religion. So I think that in the free market economy, when you include that, to include religious freedom, freedom itself provides those checks and balances for things that, like anything, just like the internet, it's good, but there's also a dark side. So that check and balance that we have in free societies I think is one of the greatest assets to deal with the negative side of religion.
Now, you mentioned religious freedom. So we've seen more restrictions on those religious freedoms recently in Western nations like the UK and the US and right here in Canada. Is this currently, or will this at some point impact our economy negatively?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, just to use a current example, many of the immigrants coming into Canada, sort of fueling the next generation of innovation, come from countries where religion is central to their identities. And so, if these folks come into Canada, whether they're Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus or Christians from from the global South or from the Middle East, if they don't feel that they're free to be their whole self, be that authentic self that faith is such an important part of, they're not going to feel like they can buy into the Canadian, project, so to speak. So that religious freedom's important for new immigrants, just as it is for other people in society. So when you feel like your faith, which for many people is a central part of their life, not everyone, but for those that it is, they don't go to work and think I'm just here to make money. They go to work, many for a purpose to glorify God. And so in that kind of thinking, that if they don't feel that they have religious freedom, that innovative, sort of spirit that says we're gonna work hard and make our country great, it gets diminished.
Right. Now, by the way, is faith on the decline in Canada overall, or is it increasing?
So overall, I mean, the faith has been on the decline in Canada, looking at census data. But faith is resilient in that there was a theory of secularization, that secularization would eventually drive religion out and just be sort of living in a few souls. But that's not really what has happened. So many of the people in Canada who are devoutly faithful continue to be. And one of the sort of secrets is that people who are more religious tend to have more kids, and then they raise more kids. So sort of built into this religious change that's happening is also what's going to happen in the next generations. First, you have the immigration coming in where people are much more religious. Second, immigrants that even aren't religious, like Chinese coming in from mainland China. I think I saw a statistic that half of them become Christians once they come to Canada. So, religion is not something that's just, sort of locked in walls, in a church or, a mosque or a synagogue. It's something's living and active. And so, I expect the religious makeup of Canada to continue to change, grow in different ways in the years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And then what about in the US? Do you see differences between Canada and the US overall, where faith is either on the rise or the decline?
The U.S., of course, tends to be a bit more religious and actively religious, more public religion in the United States. There's also been a similar decline, and sociologists have different explanations. One that I think makes sense to me is that religion has become very political in the United States. So it becomes a hot button issue. If you're following the news, the U.S. Catholic bishops are, debating whether or not Joe Biden should be allowed to take communion, receive the Eucharist, and that's political. So and Joe Biden's response was, well, for me, my faith is not politics. My faith is what sustains my soul. So I think that the question of the future of American religion is wrapped up in the degree to which faith can sort of reclaim that soulful ground rather than a political ground. And I think that will bring have more people interested in faith. But when it becomes political, it becomes divisive, and that doesn't really bode well for the future of religious growth.
Yeah, it just seems like everything these days are becoming so political. It's ridiculous. We don't have very much time left, but really quick, there are occasional arguments that if religious organizations can help restore the family unit, it could greatly reduce addiction problems, depression, gang violence, crime, which would end up saving the government and our economy huge amounts of revenue. So any thoughts on that real quick?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, what we find is that faith is a characteristic of many stable families. You can have a stable family and they don't have religion at all, but the data overwhelmingly show that where you have a more religiously active and involved family, they tend to have more longevity and a stronger family. When you have families, that's one of the most important resources for people facing addiction and other kinds of problems. Because I mean, we've done a lot of work with studying Alcoholics Anonymous and these other programs, and you can see such a difference between those who are addicted in these programs who have family support versus those who don't. And as they say in AA, you know, you're either institutionalized, dead, or you're following the AA program. That's one of their slogans, and you really see that when people don't have that family support, they tend to either get incarcerated or overdosing as well. So family is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Grimm. We appreciate having you on.
That's great, and glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. Dr. Brian Grimm is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy, How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.